was late August in 2021. I'd been craving a solo camping trip for months, the kind where you leave behind the noise of the city and just breathe. I'd found a spot online, Hollow Lake, a remote site in the Pacific Northwest, nestled deep in the Cascade Range, surrounded by dense forest and jagged peaks. The reviews were sparse. Most warned it was too isolated, no cell service, no nearby help. But I didn't care. I needed the solitude. I packed my gear, drove 6 hours from Seattle, and arrived at the lake just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in shades of fire and gold. Hollow Lake was breathtaking. Glassy expanse of water stretched before me, reflecting the towering pines that encircled it like silent sentinels. My campsite was a small clearing on the eastern shore. A fire pit sat in the center, a ring of stones blackened by years of use. I set up my tent quickly, the nylon fabric rustling as I drove in the stakes, the sound sharp in the stillness. The forest was alive with evening sounds, crickets chirping, a lone owl hooting, the gentle lap of the lake against the shore. I built a fire, the crackle of logs filling the air as I boiled water for dinner. Instant ramen never tasted so good. I sat on a log, watching the flames dance, the warmth seeping into my bones. I felt at peace for the first time in months. As night fell, temperature dropped. I added a sweater, my breath fogging in the chilly air. The stars were out in full force, a dazzling canopy above. I lay back on my sleeping pad outside the tent, staring up, losing myself in the Milky Way. The forest sounds were a comforting rhythm. Crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. But around 11 p.m. something shifted. The crickets stopped mid-chirp. The frogs fell silent. The rustling ceased. It was as if the entire forest had frozen. I sat up, my ears straining. The silence was so complete it felt like a physical weight, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I waited, expecting the sounds to return. They didn't. The fire crackled softly, but even that seemed muted, swallowed by the void. Then I heard it, a low rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the lake. Thump, thump, thump. It was faint at first. I thought it might be my own pulse, but I pressed my fingers to my wrist. My heartbeat was faster, erratic. This sound was steady, unyielding. I stood, grabbing my flashlight, its beam trembling as I swept it across the water. The lake was still, reflecting the stars like a mirror, but the thumping grew louder, closer. Thump, thump, thump. It seemed to echo off the water, bouncing back from the trees surrounding me. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice sounded small. It was swallowed by the darkness. No response came, just the thumping, now joined by a faint hum, low and resonant, like a tuning fork vibrating in my skull. The hum grew. It wove itself into the thumping, creating a dissonant harmony that made my teeth ache. I turned off my flashlight, hoping the darkness would help me focus on the sound, pinpoint its source. But the hum shifted. It became a voice, a deep, guttural whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Each word was punctuated by a thump. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, the lake, the trees, the air itself. My heart pounded. I stumbled back toward the fire, its glow, now weak, the flames flickering as if struggling to stay alive. The whisper repeated, "You shouldn't I be here." It was closer now, the thumping so loud I felt it in my chest, vibrating my ribs. I grabbed a burning log from the fire, holding it like a torch, the heat searing my hand. But I needed something, anything to fend off whatever was out there. The voice changed, it grew higher, more desperate, a woman's voice. "Run! Run! Run!" The thumping quickened. Thump, 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 like a galloping horse, circling the campsite, moving through the trees, never getting closer, but never stopping. I dropped the log, my hands shaking. I dove into my tent, zipping it shut, as if the thin nylon could protect me. Inside, the sounds intensified. The thumping was now a drumbeat, relentless, the whisper layered over it. "Run, you shouldn't be here." The voices overlapped, the deep guttural tone and the woman's plea. They wove together, a cacophony of warning and threat. I curled into a ball, my sleeping bag pulled over my head. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sounds wouldn't stop. They seemed to come from inside my skull, echoing in my mind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in that tent. The thumping slowed, the voices faded, but they were replaced by something worse, a soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails dragging across the tent fabric, slow and deliberate, circling me. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It moved clockwise around the tent. I followed the sound with my eyes, my breath shallow. I didn't dare move. The scratching paused at the tent door. Then a new sound, a low guttural growl, deep and animalistic, but with a human edge, like a voice trying to form words. I held my breath, waiting. The growl came again, closer, right outside the zipper. I don't know how I survived that night. I didn't sleep, I didn't move, I just lay there, listening as the scratching resumed, the growl fading in and out, the thumping returning every few hours, a cruel reminder of whatever was out there. When dawn finally broke, the sound stopped. The forest came alive again, crickets, birds, the lap of the lake, as if nothing had happened. I unzipped the tent, my hands trembling. I expected to see claw marks, footprints, something. But the ground was untouched, the fire pit cold, the lake calm. I packed up faster than I ever had, my gear thrown into my car. I didn't care if I left something behind. As I drove away, the lake shrinking in my rearview mirror, I heard it one last time, a faint whisper carried on the wind. "You shouldn't be here." I turned on the radio to drown it out, but the static crackled, and through it, the same voice whispered, "Run. I've never gone camping again. I can't even hear a campfire crackle without my heart racing. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear that thumping, faint but steady. Thump, thump, thump. It's out there, waiting for me to return to Hollow Lake. I fear one day I might not be able to resist its call." It was a warm summer night in 2023. I was camping with my husband and his family at a remote lake in New Mexico. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine. The distant hoot of an owl carried faintly through the trees. Our group of 10 sat huddled around the campfire. The orange glow danced on our faces as we roasted marshmallows for s'mores. Laughter echoed under a sky glittering with stars. Another group of 6 campers had set up nearby. We'd exchanged friendly nods earlier that evening. Their firelight flickered in the distance. The night felt like a perfect escape from the chaos of our daily lives. I'd always loved camping. The wilderness had a way of stripping away the noise of the world, left you raw and connected to something primal. My husband Jake sat beside me. His hand rested on my knee. He laughed at his cousin's terrible ghost story about a haunted cabin. I rolled my eyes. I wasn't easily spooked. I preferred the comfort of nature's sounds. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, the soft lap of the lake against the shore. But as the clock neared midnight, those familiar sounds began to fade. The forest grew unnaturally still. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The silence felt heavy. It pressed against my ears. I shifted uncomfortably on the log bench. My marshmallow stick drooped in my hand. Jake noticed, too. He squeezed my knee. He whispered, "You hear that?" I shook my head. I strained to listen. Nothing. Not a single cricket. Not a rustle. Just the crackle of our fire. The other group's chatter had stopped as well. Their silhouettes froze around their fire, heads tilted as if listening too. Then, a scream shattered the stillness. A little girl's voice, high-pitched and desperate, crying, "Help me!" My heart slammed against my ribs. I dropped my stick into the fire. The marshmallow sizzled as it burned. There were no kids with us. I scanned our group. Jake, his parents, his siblings, cousins, all adults, all staring at each other with wide eyes. "Did you hear that?" I asked. My voice trembled. I stood up, my legs shaky. Jake nodded, his face pale in the firelight. "It came from over there." He pointed toward the woods beyond our campsite. A dark expanse of trees stretched toward a field we hadn't explored. The other group approached us, flashlights in hand. Their leader, a burly guy named Tom, spoke first. "You heard that?" "Two, we don't have any kids either." Panic clawed at my throat. The scream came again, fainter but no less desperate. "Help me, please." It was coming from the field. I was sure of it. We grabbed our flashlights. Our group of 10 merged with their 6. 16 of us now. Beams of light slashing through the darkness as we ventured into the woods. The air felt thicker here. The pine scent turned sour. It was like rotting wood mixed with something metallic. My stomach churned. Our footsteps crunched on pine needles, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. The field opened up ahead. A clearing of tall grass bathed in moonlight. Silver light cast long shadows that seemed to shift as we approached. "There!" Jake shouted. He pointed to the far edge of the field. About 100 feet away, a figure stood motionless. My flashlight beam caught it first. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, over 6 feet, skinny to the point of emaciation. Its skin was a ghastly, unnatural white. It shimmered almost translucent under the moonlight. No features marred its body, no eyes, no nose, just a black void where its mouth should have been. The void moved. It pulsed with the little girls. "Please, help me." The cry was weaker now. It faded with every second. Yet the figure's mouth synced perfectly with the sound, as if it were speaking through her voice. We stood rooted, 16 beams of light trembling on the figure. It didn't move toward us. Instead, it backed away. Its movements were smooth, unnervingly graceful. It glided over the grass without bending a single blade. "Please, help me." The voice whimpered. It was barely audible now, fading into a whisper. I took a step forward, my instincts screaming to help. But Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't, Sarah, something's wrong." His voice was tight, his grip iron on my wrist. The figure retreated further. It reached the edge of the field, then vanished, gone in an instant, like it had never been there. The silence that followed was deafening. It pressed against my skull. I felt like I was drowning in it. We ran back to the campsite, our footsteps pounding, our breaths ragged. No one spoke. We were too scared to break the silence. Back at the fire, we piled on more logs. The flames roared higher, casting frantic shadows around us. The other group stayed with us. No one wanted to be alone. We sat in a tight circle, flashlights clutched like lifelines, eyes darting to the darkness beyond the firelight. "What was that?" Tom finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. We didn't have words for what we'd seen. The little girl's voice replayed in my mind. "Help me." It wasn't just a cry. It felt like a lure, a trap. I shivered despite the fire's heat. The night stretched on. Every rustle of leaves made us jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept my flashlight trained on the field, half expecting the figure to reappear. Its void mouth gaping, its voice calling again. Jake held my hand, his palms sweaty. He didn't let go until dawn. We didn't sleep, not a wink. We talked in hushed tones, trying to make sense of it. But the more we spoke, the less sense it made. The other group mentioned local legends, stories of a spirit that mimics voices to lure people into the woods. They called it the Whispering Wraith. I didn't believe in ghosts, but after that night, I wasn't so sure. Morning came slowly, the sun creeping over the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold. We packed up in silence, eager to leave. Our tents collapsed in record time. Our cars loaded faster than they'd ever been. As we drove out, we passed the field. I glanced at it, my stomach dropped. Where the figure had vanished, a large white cross stood, stark against the green grass. It was weathered, chipped, as if it had been there for years. I turned to Jake. "Was that there yesterday?" He shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "No, Sarah, it wasn't. We never returned to that lake. The memory of that night haunts me still. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I swear I hear that voice, the little girl's cry, whispering, 'Help me.' It comes from the shadows, from the corners of the room, from the darkness outside my window. I've tried to convince myself it's my imagination, a trick of a tired mind, but deep down, I know it's not. The Whispering Wraith found me that night. It knows my name. It's waiting for me to answer its call. I fear one night I might